Good evening to everyone and welcome to tonight's session. I'm Professor Jeanette Maritz and I'll be facilitating the session for this evening. Welcome to all our new and prospective postgraduate students and welcome to your postgraduate journey as well. We might be meeting each other from time to time on this platform. So from my side, also a warm welcome. The sessions are now compulsory, so you might have had some exposure, but for those that might be joining for the first time, you have the opportunity to post your questions or comments in the Q&A section chats. And then after I've done my presentation, I'll go over and we will have a discussion around your questions and if you need any clarifications. So from my side, I'll be putting off my camera during the presentation, but I will put it back on once we get to the question and answer session. So welcome. Please have a piece of pen or paper together with you. Make some notes. If you are working more with computers and other methods, please make notes, and then we can have a conversation afterwards. So our session tonight focuses on your topic and focus of your study, which is a very fundamental conversation to have during the start of conceptualizing your research. So very often we ask ourselves, where do I start? What do I start with? How do I know what I'm thinking about is a valid or a useful research topic? Where should I focus my study? And how do I then contextualize that in my problem statement? How does that evolve in my purpose objectives and my research questions? So in order of that, we will be talking tonight around how do we use global, national, and the institutional priorities to shape our research. When I speak about institutional priorities, I'm speaking about UNISA and their catalytic niche areas. But we will speak about the global, the national, and then institutional priorities that could shape your research. Also, some demonstration and examples. How do we move from these global, national, and institutional priorities to formulate a clear research problem? And how do we derive a purpose, objectives, and research questions from our research problem? And then very importantly, through it all, to highlight how aligning your research with developmental frameworks maximizes academic and societal impact. You must remember that when we do research to look at problems, to try and, if not solve them, to explore them further. And it's so from the beginning of our conceptualization of our research, we're already looking at what would be the potential social, societal, and research impact. So for those of you that is embarking on a PhD study and you need to show a unique contribution, very often, if you align your study and your focus with frameworks, priorities, and with having impact in mind, it already gives you a good and a strong foundation to say and to argue for the impact of your research. Not saying that the master students don't have that, but a PhD student will additionally need to show a unique contribution. And then I'll be providing some examples that can be adapted across disciplines. Sometimes some disciplines receive less attention. Sometimes the STEM research might also not be covered in the examples. So I've tried to use examples and also examples potentially from the work that I work in. But to start off, I'm going to start off with one of the global priorities that shapes our research. If you've not heard of it and you're hearing about the Sustainable Development Goals, these goals were developed around 2015 by the United Nations in terms of global imperatives and global needs to address by 2030. I think the first round was by 2030. Initially, there's been many changes in the years. Currently, we have moved to 17 sustainable development goals that indicate potential priorities that we can think about when we focus our research problems and also the focus of our study. So I'm going to briefly go through the UN's strategic development goals. And I'd like you to take notes in terms of where could your potential thinking around your topic align with. So the SDG 1 speaks to no poverty, and with meaning that there would be an end of poverty in all forms everywhere. Now, you can think that poverty is still such a big concern that clearly we haven't attained these SDGs by the first date that they set. So no poverty and an end to poverty is still a huge global concern. Then zero hunger, into hunger, improve food security, nutrition, and to promote sustainable agriculture. Also a great imperative that we're not even close to honing in on achieving that SDG. Number 3 is good health and well-being. So for those of you that is in the health sciences, health studies, psychology, sociology, health and well-being in general. SDG 3 speaks to ensuring healthy lives and promote well-being for all. Now, well-being can be both physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, psychosocial well-being. So it is the broadest sense of well-being, moving beyond just physical health. Then number 4 is quality education, to provide inclusive, equitable, and quality education for all. So those of you that is in the educational arena and discipline, you might find yourself in this SDG. Number 5 is around gender equality, achieving gender equality and empower women and girls. So gender studies might find themselves here, but also keep in mind that your study might look at more than one SDG. And clearly, if you tap into more than one SDG, the more impact your research potentially has. So you might find yourself addressing SDG 3, good health, and SDG 5, for instance, gender equality in certain of your studies or problem statements. So it's not just about finding yourself potentially only one. Then number 6 is clean water and sanitation, to ensure access to safe water and sanitation for all. Number 7, affordable clean energy, provide access to sustainable and modern energy. That's also quite a hot topic at this time. Then decent work and economic growth for those of you in the economic sciences, and also in the world of work, to promote inclusive economic growth and decent work for all. Then number 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, to build a resilient infrastructure and promote innovation. So there's a lot of scope for those of you that's doing innovative research, potentially maybe having patents to register, and also in terms of new innovations or promoting innovations. Then number 10, to reduce inequalities, and that is focused in terms of reducing inequality within and among countries. Now, those of you who have done some reading or just by everyday life would probably have realized that the inequalities are potentially getting more rather than less. And if we just think about the inequalities in terms of access to internet infrastructure, who has access, who doesn't have access, global north conversations that's often overshadowing global south conversations, the legitimacy of African epistemology and knowledge can all fall within the space of inequality in and amongst countries. Then sustainable cities and communities make cities safe, inclusive and sustainable. So the whole movement in terms of green cities, but also in terms of infrastructure, access, and so on. Then number 12, responsible consumption and production, ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. And that's possibly something that's in the news every day in terms of greenhouse issues, issues regarding sustainable growth and economies might all fall within this SDG. And then the last 3 focus on number 13, climate action. And that is a very, very, very hot topic at the moment. Take action and to combat climate change and its impacts. So this SDG in terms of climate action really connects with all of the SDGs. You know, if we think about climate action, we think of the disasters, natural and unnatural disasters that is impacted by climate change, how it could impact health, it can impact education, it can impact economies. So climate action is a very, very a large SDG that many of the others also interlink into. And then number 14, life below water, conserving oceans, seas, and marine resources. And for those that do not live near oceans and seas, this might seem like a very far off topic, but there is great emphasis now on looking at the sea, how does it sustain lives, the ecosystems, and so on. Then also life on land, also linking to ecosystems, forests and biodiversity, and often life below and life on land have very strong links to each other. Then number 16, these last from number 14 to 17 are more of the latest SDGs. So peace, justice, and strong institutions to promote peace, justice, and inclusive institutions. And number 17, partnership for goals, strengthening global partnership for sustainable development. So those are the last are some of the newer SDGs, but I hope by just briefly mentioning the SDGs that you can potentially see where your research problem or your research focus could potentially fall into one of these global imperatives that could make your research both relevant and have impact. So when we move from global priorities to more local or national priorities that can have an influence or focus our research, we think about the National Development Plan, and there's many others. I'm only mentioning the NDP as an example, but there can be other imperatives. The same with the SDGs. There can be other global imperatives as well. So these are just examples. So if you're a postgraduate student in South Africa, the National Development Plan of 2030 can influence your research focus or a topic in several ways. So the NDP is a strategic framework for aiming to eliminate poverty, reduce inequality, and to provide multiple entry points for academic inquiry across disciplines. So can you already see how the national priorities are fitting into global priorities? So yeah, we also have the aspect of eliminating poverty. We also have the aspect of reducing inequality, for example. And so a lot of the national priorities hold hands with global imperatives and policies. So here is some examples of how it could impact your research or align your topic or your focus area. So you could, for instance, look at education and skills development. That would align to the NDP, healthcare system improvement, job creation and economic transformation, environmental sustainability, social protective and inclusive development. Also very strong in terms of when we look at interdisciplinary, you might not yet look at transdisciplinary, but interdisciplinary is merging more than one in focus on more than one discipline. So merging, for instance, agriculture and mental health. And I might give you an example of that and how I contextualized, for example, my own research. But that this interdisciplinary and applied focus makes your research also more impactful, and with a greater impact, your chances of getting funding also increases. So when we look at interdisciplinary and applied focuses, we want to address real world challenges. As you could see from the SDGs, they're all based in real world challenges. So in its interdisciplinary form and solution orientation, it then links our theory to practice and potentially also inform or reform policy. So, for instance, a nursing student might explore community-based mental health interventions aligned with the primary healthcare re-engineering. That would be Chapter 10 in the NDP, for example. So all of these priorities and imperatives are usually solution orientated. So to find solutions for our current problems in the world, in Africa, in South Africa, in your community. So they all hold hands and they all cascade down and impact on each other in some form or way. So the emphasis for transformation and equity, also in the NDP, stresses redressing historical inequalities. So there's great scope of work in that, promoting inclusive growth and gender equality, improving outcomes for marginalized groups, for instance, youth, women, rural populations, and there's many more. So you might position your topic within frameworks of decolonization, social justice, or public accountability. And we'll speak about, theoretical frameworks and that maybe a bit later on. but also the aligning with the National Development Plan's priorities. We also support their support for innovation and knowledge economy. So the NDP promotes knowledge-intensive economy through strengthening, for instance, postgraduate education, or fostering research and innovation for development, for instance, or encouraging university community partnerships. So a research topic could, for example, explore innovative ecosystems, digital inclusion, or sustainable local development goals or models. So, as I said before, the more our research becomes impactful and aligned to global, national, and we'll speak about the institutional priorities, the more likely you are able to receive funding from grant bodies like the National Research Foundation or the Departments of Science and Innovation. So supervisors, faculty, and institutions often expect that a student articulate how their research supports national goals. So maybe just to bring it back home a bit more, for instance, example of topics influenced by the National Development Plan, education. For instance, example topic, improving rural access to quality teacher education through mobile learning. You can already see in that one topic, access is one of the, not just the SDGs, but also the UN development goals. Quality education is one goal. Mobile learning is aligned to another. So the interdisciplinary nature of our topic. Health sciences, for instance, evaluating the effectiveness of integrated chronic disease management in private healthcare or primary healthcare. Business and economics, assessing the role of SMEs in job creation in township economies. In environmental studies, community-led water governance for sustainability in drought-prone regions. So you can see that all these topics most would align to different SDGs. And also different priorities in our national development goal. So social science, for instance, the youth political participation in democratic renewal in post-apartheid South Africa. So these are really just examples of topics to illustrate how not just the NDP, but the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals could potentially help you focus your study in terms of impact and also in terms of generating potential grants for your study and helping you to argue for the usefulness of your research. So very often we start a research topic because it has some interest to ourselves. So I'm going to go through the UNISA catalytic niche areas. And then when we talk about our problem statements, our problem that we want to engage in, we can talk about this a bit more. So the last one that I want to share with you is the alignment to institutional priorities. Now, you are doing your studies at UNISA, so when I speak about institution, it would be UNISA. So UNISA has its own catalytic niche areas, and there are 10 catalytic niche areas. Now, every time your supervisor approves your topic or your title. Usually it's a topic first before it becomes title, and the title is usually a working title. But when they sign that off, they need to indicate in which of the catalytic niche areas of UNISA is your study falling into. So it didn't, previously it didn't work that way, or there weren't as explicit niche areas. But UNISA is very, very strongly standing on their niche areas. They have to do that to be competitive and to also adhere to research and impact of the studies of the students at UNISA, and therefore also the publications, being able to access grants and so on. So UNISA has 10 catalytic niche areas, and you would need to find where you fit in terms of a potential topic. The first one is marine studies. So you might think that's very far off, because traditionally UNISA was maybe not so strong in marine studies, and you might think, oh, they're based in Pretoria, what do they have to do with marine studies? But that's one of UNISA's catalytic niche areas. It's growing fast. The marine economy is a very hot topic. So if you find yourself somewhere, not just in STEM research, but also interdisciplinary alignment. So sociologies, education could all figure into one or another form in terms of marine studies. But marine studies would then focus on ocean ecosystems, ocean economies, marine biodiversity, coastal development. For instance, assessing marine pollution's impact on coastal livelihoods. There you can see there's maybe more than one of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also that finds its way into UNISA's catalytic niche areas. The second is aviation and aeronautical studies. So this might be new for all of you, or for many of you, that UNISA actually has these catalytic niche areas. So, for instance, exploring air transport systems, safety, aerospace technology, analyzing, for example, the topic policy gaps in aviation safety in the SADC, South Africa, or it might be Africa at large. The third, automotive studies, research on mobility, electrical vehicles, innovation in manufacturing. So, for instance, evaluating the readiness of electronic vehicle adoption in South Africa, for example. Then very, very important, energy. You also saw it in the SDGs. It covers renewable energy, access and sustainability. So, for instance, studies looking at investigating solar energy uptake in under-resourced communities. It might also look at renewable energy, safe energy. So I'm currently involved at the Institute for Social and Health Sciences. And they, for instance, looking at, or one of their projects was looking at bioenergy for rural communities to harness other forms of energy to serve rural communities or communities that doesn't have access to safe forms of energy. Then number 5, space studies and SKA. Now SKA stands for Square Kilometer Array. And you might, that might be a new concept to you. I certainly also needed to go and look what it speaks to. But for instance, a topic could be exploring public engagement with the Square Kilometer Array initiative. Then number 6, the 4th Industrial Revolution. And I'm sure some comments will be, we're way beyond the 4th, we're already in the 5th or the 6th. But it evolves around digitization and technology, AI, digital access. So, for instance, in my case, I focus on postgraduate support. And I might look at how does machine learning enhance the mental health support for students, for instance. So part of my studies is focusing on can we use AI chatbots to support postgraduate students in their mental health. Natural sciences, biotech includes genetics, chemistry, biology, and indigenous biomedical innovation. So, a very random topic, but studying medicinal properties of African flora. And then number 8 is health studies and medicine. Initially, it was only health studies, but we now have medicine as well. So that spans mental health, public health, nursing, clinical systems, and developing a mental health framework for postgraduate students, for instance. That's aligned to my research topics. And then the last 2 is number 9, feminist, womanist, Busani theorizations, exploring African feminist lenses, gender equality, and epistemic justice. For example, a Busadi analysis of women leadership in academia. And then number 10, which is where my research focus is in student support and co-curricular activities. So focusing on holistic student development, not only postgraduate. Postgraduate is simply my focus. Retention and wellness. So many of the research around supporting students, supporting access, systems, equality, access, might fall within this aspect in terms of student support and co-curricular activities. So co-curricular activities refer to activities that fall outside of the curriculum. So that might be activities like, if it was a residential campus, having soccer matches or walks for physical health, or any of the other activities that we have, or that's put in place for students in terms of other forms of support. So we've now gone through 17 plus the National Development Goals. There's quite a number of them, plus UNISA's 10 catalytic niche areas. But I hope that through all of them, you can see how they interlink, and how the global imperatives influence the national imperatives and has influenced UNISA's catalytic niche areas. So UNISA's catalytic niche areas isn't something that was just grabbed by with the VC that said, oh, I want these 10, let's just grab something from nowhere and make these our research focus areas. These focus areas align directly to global imperatives, national imperatives, and the institutional priorities in terms of their research areas. So for where you are now, you will definitely need to find a home for your focus area in terms of somewhere in these catalytic niche areas, as they are institutional priorities. So many of us don't really think about these larger imperatives that grabs our attention for our research problem. So very often we find a research problem either because it's a personal interest or it's been a personal experience, especially in master's studies. Or we've lived through something, or we've discovered that something isn't working well, or we are in a working environment, and we realize, these things aren't addressed properly. So very often our research problem originates from something personal. Very often in master's studies, I still need to find a master's study that isn't personal in some aspect or another. But it's and that's a legitimate source of looking for research problems to investigate. our communities, ourselves, our experiences are all a way of establishing an inquiry or inquisitiveness in terms of focusing on a research topic then. But we also need to align our research problems and our focus area to key priorities. So we start with real world issues you care about and that affects yourself, your community. And when we speak about community, we're speaking about community, not just your physical community, but it can be any community at large, or a group of people, or a group of companies, or a greater collective. So that's a good place to start. But then we need to check the alignment with either global priorities and ask yourself the question, does your topic address, for instance, poverty, education, health, gender equality, sustainability? These are not exclusively all of them. You can now gather from the very beginning of the presentation that there are many priorities that you could align your research to. But ask yourself the question, does it align with some or other priority? Then linking the national goals, for instance, to your problematizing of that focus area. How does your research, for instance, support South Africa's vision for transformation or equity? Or how does your research link to global priorities? Or how does your research link to what aspect in terms of priority areas does your research link? So when I started with my studies, many years ago, 25 years ago, we didn't really, it wasn't this explicit. You know, you had a problem, you wrote a problem statement, and you carried out your research. But the research arena has changed, it is changing. And that alignment is very important and something that we are now encouraged to be more explicit about. So you need to ask yourself questions around your potential topic or your potential focus area. Then, very important, choose a topic within the unique strategic focus area. There's 10 of them, and they could have many subdivisions. So it's very unlikely that you won't find an area where your research could have a contribution. Then when we look at crafting a research problem, the standard for research problems is that they are very specific. They need to be relevant, and the relevance we've now spoken about in terms of priorities, and it needs to be grounded in local, national, or global context. So when we look at defining our research problem, there's many aspects that could guide you in developing your problem statement or refining your problem. So you can ask yourself, for instance, if you've identified what the problem is and you're able to articulate what the problem is, then justifying that problem in terms of, for who is it a problem? Why is it a problem? What is it about the problem that will be a problem if it's not addressed? So the who, what, when, why, and how. The Kipling's 5 men, if you've heard of Kipling's 5 men, who, what, when, why, and how. You can also ask yourself around your research question to make the question very clear for the reader. I'm speaking about the reader because you're not writing for your supervisor. Your supervisor might be the first reader, but ultimately you need to convince the scientific committee that your research is grounded and that your research is relevant and that it's worthy of the resources that's being invested in that. And for that reason, there are many readers of your, for instance, first your proposal. And the scientific committee will read it, the ethics committee will read it, and based on their reading of your proposal, they will then either give you the go-ahead or tell you need to make more refinements, or that you need to be able to articulate aspects clearer. So the very first thing that you start arguing about is putting an argument forth for your research problem and why it is so a worthy topic. It comes from a worthy problem statement. So one of the golden aspects of quality research is if it's a worthy topic. Criteria, if you want. So you need to be able to clarify yourself, for yourself, is this topic a worthy topic? And how do I then justify that this topic is worthy in terms of alignment to priorities, alignment to niche areas? How would it be impactful, for instance? That will be in your rationale. But your problem statement needs to be very specific. Now, very often we struggle with what is background and what is a research problem. So background would give you information about the research problem. So where did the problem start? What's the history? What's the statistics, for instance, around this problem? What happened before? Were there any policy directives? Were there any great calamities like COVID, or what was the history basically of this problem? That would go into your background. But when you get to your problem statement, it needs to be clearly focused on the problem. So very often I find that students waffle a lot in the problem statement, and that dilutes the problem statement. So try and keep the background information to the background and the issues around the problem to the problem statement. So a problem statement in some disciplines could be a single sentence. Some disciplines ask for a more elaborate, that it's more than just one statement, but that it's nearly it's sometimes a paragraph, or at times even more than that, if there are different dimensions, for instance, to a problem that has effect. So very often we also find it difficult when disciplines have different templates for doing the proposal, and one might ask you for an introduction. Now, our introduction usually also gives us the background to the problem, and then it leads into, so introductions, background are often a similar focus to provide context to your problem, to provide maybe justification for how big the problem is, or what's the historical significance of your problem. And then your ability to write your problem, your research problem, in such a way that the reader can clearly see that you are able to look at priorities, align your research problem to those, justify why this research topic is a worthy topic, and that the problem statement also addresses real world concerns. Okay, so I hope that gives a bit of clarity around the expectations of a problem statement and how it might develop from, you might also be reading, you read about something, it piqued your interest in your field, you read an article, And maybe at the end of the article, they had certain recommendations for future research. So if you're still not sure how to choose a topic, or whether a topic would be something worthwhile researching, read articles in your discipline or in your focus areas. Very often at the end of an article, they would say future research and recommendations for future research. So you might find some hints in that as well. That would be a nice justification if you say that previous researchers has found A, B, and C, and they suggested further research. Or I've read this, I've investigated some, and I think there is a certain gap. So very important with our topics and our research focus, specifically in a PhD, is that you need to, through your reading, identify what is the gap, so that you can position your study within a certain discourse, or that your study addresses a certain gap. And that gap can be in terms of literature. It might be a gap in a practical area. It might be a gap in theory. It might be a gap in methodology. It might be a gap in all of that. But we need to read to establish what research has been done on this topic, and where do I find myself in the topic that I want to address within current discourses or within current gaps that have been identified. So just because something is a problem for you, it doesn't mean that problem hasn't been addressed previously. And I often find that students will start off and saying, I work in a school, and there's an issue with discipline. So I'm going to look at disciplinary issues in schools, primary schools, for instance. And that's a problem because I'm living it. But if you go to literature, you would probably be able to answer that question without doing research. You could just read. So there was a PhD student in a group of emerging researchers that I spoke to today, and she justified with compassion and passion why she wanted to do a research study and why it was worthy. And at the end, I stopped her and said, you know, you can answer all of your research questions by just going to literature. You don't need to do a study because the questions have already been answered. So you need to read further and make sure that your topic is falling in a gap in some way or another, and that it's just not just repeating research for research's sake. Very often in master studies, you can say that, you know, a study has been done and I'm looking at it in another context or from another theoretical framework. That's possible. But in a PhD study, in order to navigate your requirement of a unique contribution, you would really need to justify what is the gap, and how your unique contribution will come from that. So just some ideas to keep you thinking or start your thinking in terms of how does your topic or your focus then translate into a research problem. Now, your research problem, there's a golden thread that goes through your research focus, your research topic, your problem statement, your purpose, your objectives, and your questions. It's you know, when we hypnotize someone and we say the same words over and over and over again. Now, we call it a hypnotic pattern. But those initial aspects of your research also becomes a golden thread. So don't introduce new concepts and new aspects in your objectives that weren't articulated, for instance, in your research problem. So there needs to be alignment between your research problem, your objectives, your questions, and your operationalization of those And when I speak about operationalization, before quantitative research, we don't operationalize in qualitative research, but that they need to hold hands. So your research objectives define what your study aims to achieve. So by the end of the study, I want to achieve a greater understanding related to a certain phenomenon, a certain context. So your objectives is your final place where you want to end up. And then your objectives, there's different stances. Some disciplines require a purpose statement and objectives. Now, your purpose statement could be your end, and your objectives would be how would you reach that end. If they only require objectives, then the same would go. Your objectives should be clear, measurable, and aligned with your problem statement. So don't bring in new concepts or new ideas in your objectives that weren't stated in your research problem. They need to hold hands. Then in the same light, your research questions need to align with your objectives. So you can't bring in new questions that hasn't been articulated in your research problem or your objectives. They need to hold hands. So, for instance, example, if you wanted to explore the effectiveness of peer mentoring in improving postgraduate retention, then your question would align: how do postgraduate students experience peer mentoring in a distance learning context? Now, see how in the questions I now brought in a new concept, distance learning context, which wasn't in the problem in the research objectives. So if I wanted to write it in a way to align, I need to, in my objectives, state that it's in a specific context, or I need to take the context out of my question. So that you can see there's already the main concept is peer mentoring, improving postgraduate retention. So the main concepts are there, but what I've given as an example is some disciplines might require you to put in the context. Other disciplines are okay to have a broader question and you explain the context very early in your proposal to orientate the reader. So there's different schools of thought. Hear from your supervisor if they require context to already be in your titles and in your objectives and questions. And then operationalizing to translate the abstract concepts into measurable indicators. We call that operationalization. And so in that, we clarify how the variables or constructs will be observed, measured, and analyzed. So for instance, I can say student support is operationalized as access to mentoring, counseling, and digital resources, as an example. So I hope that you get a sense of your establishing your research problem and how it holds hands with your purpose objective research question, and if you need to, the operationalization. But I'll also give you another example in a minute or so. So the last objective that we said is the maximization of the scholarship and academic impact of your research. So how do we assure that? We assure that in aligning with strategic priorities. And I said there's more than just these, but definitely the UNISA niche areas. Theoretical contributions, so those are contributions that would advance or critique existing theories, develop new conceptual frameworks. That's usually more in PhD studies, but not out of the scope of a master's study. So having impact for your research, strong theoretical contributions also increases the impact and chances for receiving a good review in terms of the impact. Innovation, it can be methodological, it can be in different contexts. So you can, use maybe innovative research methodologies or combine methodologies in unique ways. Please don't try and do this on a master's level, okay? On a master's level, you are only required to demonstrate that you can follow the research process. No more, no less. You don't need to do an original contribution. You just need to be able to demonstrate that you can follow the research process. For a PhD study, you need to establish a unique contribution. Right. Publication, dissemination. Once your study is done, master study, PhD, you could potentially start publishing from your PhD, theoretical, conceptual frameworks, unique methodological aspects, your findings, and so on. But what could improve your impact is targeting high impact journals. And that's, I guess, a conversation on its own. But a high impact journal, journals have different rankings. So they are ranked, top journals are A rated, and then you get B rated, C rated. And anything beyond that is usually not within the rating system. So when you choose journals to read from, try and focus on high impact journals, because that already positions you in the discourse of high impact journals and high impact conversation and high impact research. So that you can school yourself in these discourses and ways of publishing. That will make it easy for you to also then publish in higher ranking journals. Yeah, some people have ideas whether you should publish during your studies. UNISA's current policy is still that a master's student needs to produce a research that has been that's been handed in for review at a journal. But a PhD study, currently you need to have 2 research articles before you can graduate. Yeah, I don't know if they always are so strict in terms of withholding your graduation until you've published, not submitted for publication, but actually published. And there's great discourses going on around that. But currently that's the policy at UNISA. I'm watching the space around that. But please just make sure that that you read the policy and that you know what's the expectations to be able to have your degree conferred, especially for a PhD. So all of that goes into your conceptualization very early on. So it's there's a lot of conceptual thinking going on in terms of choosing your topic and your focus area. It's not a small exercise, and that there's many aspects that you need to take into account. Then very, very important, societal relevance. You can actually not afford to do research without societal relevance. We often speak about research uptake, and that research uptake is low. And very often it's low because we didn't involve our communities from the start. We go to them, we collect data, and we leave them. And there's no uptake for your research, and potentially the uptake is low because you maybe didn't consider the societal impact. and engaging with stakeholders to make sure that there is relevance. Okay, so please think about this. And then your research visibility and collaboration. There's so many uh, uh, avenues now in terms of using digital tools, social media, networks to enhance your visibility and impact of your research. I'm now speaking about visibility and collaboration. Okay, I know there's going to be a question around the use of AI, and I don't want to open that up now. I don't think it's a conversation for now. But there are many research tools now available that can enhance your thinking around your topic and your focus area of your research. So one example, lastly, just to maybe give you an idea how to package everything together. So sorry that the slide seems small, but I wanted to have it in one and not over a few slides. So say, for instance, this is around economic sciences example. So say, for instance, your topic is exploring the impact of digital financial inclusion on youth entrepreneurship in rural Africa. And your research problem goes something in the likes of, despite the increase in mobile access, rural youth face barriers to formal financial services that hinder entrepreneurial activity. Limited digital infrastructure, financial literacy, and institutional support exacerbate the economic exclusion. Now, clearly, you will justify all of these statements with literature, all right? So know that you can make no claim if you can't justify it with evidence. So yeah, I've just written it in terms of a broad picture for you. So at the end of a problem statement, you can, for instance, say that there's a need to understand how digital financial tools can foster inclusive economic participation aligned with SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, and the NDP's vision of inclusive development. So you can see by arguing with evidence, first of all, that you can bring clarity, that you can bring justification to your research, and the reader can automatically see where the alignment is and therefore potential impact and contributions. So your research purpose might be to investigate how digital financial services influence youth entrepreneurship in rural South Africa. Research objectives would be then, what steps do you need to take to reach your aim or your purpose? That could be examine the accessibility, to assess relationship, to identify barriers. So this is more quantitative study, and then your research questions would then align to your research objectives. So I hope this gives you more or less an example of that pattern of holding hands and having external logic. So we speak about external and internal logic, also a conversation for another day. But external logic means that there's, for instance, that alignment that takes place is external logic. And then, for instance, what you have under your research topic heading, the content of that refers to internal logic. So there needs to be external and internal logic for that golden thread to go through the first phases of your research proposal. All right, I've given some references and how you could maybe access. But I'm noting again that there's more than just these priorities. There's other priorities as well. These priorities change as you could see with the United Nations goals. As the priorities are set forth and they aren't achieved, there's maybe better alignment, or they are put in terms of collaboration. You can see SDG 17, where they're trying to have these priorities to address where there were shortfalls. So very important when you read for your topic and try and adjust your focus or get a focus, that you continue reading. You'll be studying for 3 or 5 years and things will change in that time. So please, these alignments can also be, for instance, policy. It can be national, national plans that change, that realign. Strategic objectives of different industries, for instance, might change, might adapt. But the world of research, the world changes rapidly, and I think even more than what it did in the past. So our research needs to keep up with that. So if you've established a research problem and it's 3 years along the line, please keep on reading on directives and see how they change or potentially could foster alliance, and that you don't get left behind. So keep on reading. I think my central message to any of this is read, 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 and read. PhD, you don't study for a PhD, you read for a PhD. So if you go back to the Oxford definition of what's a PhD, you will see that you read for a PhD. Master's level, very important. The central message is you have to read. You have to read wide and you need to read narrow. So very often we start with a very broad topic, and usually I find in the beginning stages that students want to conquer the world, and you need to refine and refine and refine until you find a workable topic to work with that is feasible, that you have the resources for, and that you can, very importantly, complete in the time that you're given for your studies. So most of the students are not full-time students. So a PhD student typically has 5 years to complete, a master's student 3 years to complete. So make sure that your research is focused enough so that you can achieve that objective to also complete in the time given. So we don't want to take 9 or 10 years on a PhD journey. In that time, you could have done 3 PhDs because the world of your research problem would have possibly changed 3 times over already. So when thinking about topics and refining those, also keep in mind the time and the resources that you have available to be able to achieve that objective. All right, so I've done quite a bit of talking, and I am done on my side with speaking. So I'm just going to, on my side, see to maximize my windows, and that I can also now see the question and answers. So just give me a few seconds so that I can just load those on my side, and then we will engage in that as well. So I forgot to mention in the beginning, while I'm waiting for my quick Q&As to load. Hopefully it's not because they are not there yet. They are maybe still loading, but to just make you aware that the slides will be made available to you. Deneo is very good at that. They will give you links to that. There will be links to the voice recordings as well. Yes, I'm good to go on my side. I've got your questions. I'm going to open my camera again. And yes, there's been some activity. Lawrence says, ma'am, is it not advisable for one to conduct research in the area where they work just to make things easier, such as getting permission letters, accessing publications, reports that can be useful for your study? Yes, certainly. You could do research at your work, but you are still able to align that research to priorities. So it might be a work-related issue, but you need to situate that research issue or problem within a greater body of knowledge. And so be careful of there's other discourses. To do research in your own organization can be seen by some people as backyard research. So, and they also call it backyard research because it is doing research in your backyard. I'm not saying you can't do it. You certainly can. Just don't ever say that you're doing it because you chose a certain context or topic because it's easier to access because you work there. All right. They'll take you apart. So please use academic reasoning for why it is best. If it's a PhD, I don't think it's going to necessarily hold. You might need to look at more than one organization. So you can do it, but be careful how you phrase it. And doing it because it's easy isn't a justification for choosing a specific research setting. All right, so just be careful in how you justify it. Then when can we expect contact from our supervisors? Sure, I'm so sorry that comes up in these sessions. Usually what happens, so this is more institutional knowledge, that you once you have been admitted for your studies, you allocated a supervisor. That supervisor should receive a letter that you are a registered student. Now, that letter sometimes takes a while to come through. I've only now received the letters of my students that's accepted and registered, probably in the past week. So sometimes it takes a bit more time. If you do know who your supervisor is and you have been allocated, then take the first step and contact them. Don't necessarily wait until forever. They can, for various reasons, maybe take longer. So if you know who the supervisor is and you've got their contact details, then you can contact them as well. So don't always wait for them. If you don't know who your supervisor is and you have tried the department and they can't tell you, then you might need to wait for your official communication from your supervisor, but it varies within departments. But if you haven't received anything, it should be going through now, sooner rather than later. Okay, but message from my side, make contact if you know who it is. And I hope for all of you that it happens soon, because we're already in May, half of the year nearly finished. And if you wanted to complete your proposal in the first year, you can imagine half the year's already gone. So do what you need to do to maybe make that contact. Danae has given you the links. We have a comment. If I encounter challenges with the feasibility or relevance of my current research topic during the initial stages, would it be acceptable to revise or change the topic to better align with practical findings or available data? Yes, certainly. You must remember the beginning stages, it's a tentative or a working title or a working topic. And certainly that can be refined. So, and inevitably it is refined, especially if you have your first meeting with your supervisor, also maybe aligning with their research niche areas. So students, for instance, that I take on now, I only take on students that work in my niche area. So there might be a slight adaptation or another angle. So it's quite, I would say, the rule rather than not the rule that there is substantive changes and refinements going on in the early stages. And that's a process. It's a normal process. It's a process for all of us. So yes, it's the norm. But you need to reach some stage where you say this is it. So you can go walk about and suss things out for so long. Then you need to kind of get it done and commit and make sure that it is relevant, feasible, and everything else. But certainly in the beginning phases, you're working with a tentative title, with a working title topic as well. So when meeting with your supervisor, they might also give inputs. Remember, they are usually the experts in the field, or I would hope they are, and they might also be able to advise you, this has already been done, or you can maybe look at this angle, or look at this author's work, or follow this discourses. So yes, in the beginning it is definitely possible, and even in later stages, you might come across challenges in terms of access, for instance, to communities. And you might not be able to access all the communities, and you might need to only choose one or two. But all of those, if it's challenges while you're collecting data, those challenges you can report in your methodological section and justify it there. If there's major changes and you've already received ethical clearance, you just need to inform them. And if there is then an adjustment in terms of a title, and then those processes also needs to take place. But certainly in the beginning, it's normal to go through various reiterations of your study. Good evening. Can I continue with the research topic from my application? Yes, certainly. That's hopefully there's some work that went into your application and that it's fine and aligns and you're ready to go. Yeah, certainly. Thank you for the presentation. Main question for me is getting access to the ethical committee, which the supervisor is not keen to assist. I'm sitting with a complete proposal. Sure. Okay, so I'm not quite sure in which department or you are and what the processes is, but currently in order to apply for ethics, you need to have scientific clearance before. So if your proposal has been completed, it's been reviewed by the scientific committee, you get a document to say that you can submit for ethics. Now, without that document, you can't apply. The ethical applications are now online. You register for the ethical applications online. Your supervisors also linked. and you upload your documents, but in the end, the supervisor needs to sign off that you may submit. So you have to get them on board. You have to have completed the processes before you can submit for ethical review. So I'm not sure if you have already given your proposal to the scientific committee to clear, but usually you need to have that in place first before you can go online for ethical clearance. But the ethical clearance is now all online. And it will then be, you'll submit it, you'll say to which college you're submitting to, it will then be challenged to the different departments or reviewers that will look at your work. But you'll need to have this, the signed com document, and your supervisor will need to sign it off. So maybe look at the processes, build a relationship with your supervisor, maybe ask them if there's still issues outstanding. You know, you're ready, you feel that you're ready to submit. Very often the student feels ready, but the supervisor doesn't. So building a relationship with a supervisor, very important, so that you can have open communication. You know, she might not be keen to assist because she has certain reservations or there's still processes. So try and keep the communication lines open and maybe ask for a meeting or ask if there's aspects that is still outstanding. So rather frame it in that way than going, you know, you're kind of not very helpful in terms of the ethical application. So I hope that helps a bit with the way forward. Can my supervisor suggest another topic for me? In that case, is it better to consult with them first before going all in? Yes, it is possible that they might suggest. I don't know if they will suggest a completely other topic, because they've accepted you based on your application and a tentative area of inquiry, hopefully. So if there are tweaks or suggestions, it shouldn't really be necessarily a major overall. And I do agree, before you go all in, that you kind of get that clarification from them. So also start the conversation, ask them, you know, from upfront, is this topic workable? Should I go ahead with what I submitted with my application? Do you think it's a workable topic? Is there any additions or things that I need to look at before, as you say, you go all in? You really wouldn't want to go through everything and then have a major overall at the end. So good idea to consult with them. If I do so, I think that goes on with the previous one. If I do, if I do a study at my workplace about inclusive, since I feel there's a lot of gap hindering the full implementation, yet the school is deemed as a full service, and I know that they don't want to hear it from a junior level. What's the best possible way of conducting such a study? Don't make it about the school per se. The school now gave you a kind of an inkling. So the personal comes in here. You've kind of gotten a drift that there is maybe a problem in terms of that. And that's why, you know, doing research in your backyard often can implode and have consequences for you, especially if there's a power imbalance, they don't want to listen to a junior. Then use it as a springboard for your inquiry. You can always give them a copy of your findings or a report. But also think about, you know, your own vulnerabilities, and use that inkling that things isn't done as the way it should be, as a larger problematizing of an issue. And look out for yourself as well, and then maybe choose another setting similar, or take another angle. So also kind of protecting yourself if there are power imbalances, and if you are basing your research on a work challenge. You certainly can use that as a springboard, but there's different considerations if you feel there's power imbalances. Can you provide more information regarding completing your doctoral by publication? I'm in SENS. Okay, so the same would go. You would still need to write an overall proposal. So by publication, PhD, I think it's 5 publications that you need to have, but that there's still kind of the same proposal. You are just conceptualizing your publications from the beginning already. So those publications might form where other students have chapters. Your chapters would be articles, written articles. So you would still do a literature review, literature study in some form, which is publishable. You could have your findings in more than one paper. You can end up with a conceptual contribution or some contribution. So in terms of the process is more or less similar in terms of conceptualization. It's just that your chapters are published articles. There isn't really a choice of is it better, is it worse. I think it's different for different people. Some people can pull it off in 4 or 5 years, but the publication route, it takes time to publish articles. High-level journal impact factors takes 2 years to publish an article. So it's certainly, UNISA does allow for that. If you then choose a supervisor, think about asking if the supervisor has previously supervised a study, a PhD by publication. If they've not, then you need to decide if you want to go with a supervisor where you're the first person that they supervise in terms of publication. So there's not that many people at UNISA in terms of having supervised students by publication, but there's no reason to deter you. You just need to keep in mind and ask, has that supervisor previously, do they have the skills, the training? There is a lot of training for supervisors taking place to upskill and to be able to supervise PhDs by publication. But I don't think there's a huge cohort of supervisors that can supervise that. If there are, and you feel like you can do it, then go for it. There's many advantages of doing it by publication. It would mean you would walk out in 4 or 5 years with a PhD and 5 publications, which is no mean feat. If you want to become an academic, that already gives you entry to a senior researcher, and the ability to then apply for promotion is better. So think about the advantages, disadvantages. Is there someone in SENS that has done that before, or that you can be confident in supervising you in that? So it's a considerable consideration to make a decision on. Okay, so my few cents with. Okay, it will be shared, anonymous. We've got that covered. I think it's already, the link is shared in the chats. Thank you for this presentation. My question is, if I plan to have my proposal approved by the end of the year, when must I have it ready for submission? That depends on which approval you are referring to. If you are referring to scientific review, then probably around September, latest probably October. Remember, by November, December, students are submitting their thesis and dissertation for examination. So the academic supervisors are incredibly busy in terms of the final stages when their students submitting their research. So a proposal then might be delayed. So I encourage my students to, by September, October, be ready for scientific review. You must also remember that your funding from UNISA is also based on those milestones. So if in this year you've completed scientific clearance, you've got the letter from the scientific committee to say that you have complied, then you apply for funding from UNISA. If you've got scientific clearance, you will in the next year, if you applied for funding and there's funds available, you will get funding for your tuition for the next year. If you've got ethical clearance, you can apply for funding and it might be granted if there's funds for your tuition and all your research activities, which is around 80,000 Rand. It's significant. So it's not just about passing and ticking these boxes. It also has a potential influence on your ability to ask and get funding. So yeah, I would say if you can have it ready by September, October, before it gets very busy with students submitting, especially if you have a supervisor that has a large supervision load. I know I've got about, at any given year, about 3 or 4 PhD students submitting. So it's crunch time. I barely have time to look at proposals at that time of the year. So September, October, if you ask me. Thank you for a beautiful presentation. Does UNISA allow a doctorate degree to... does UNISA allow awarding of a doctorate degree to a master's student who has produced outstanding research that meets the standard of doctoral thesis? It doesn't happen often. You can certainly try and justify it, but it isn't done often. Okay, but if you have done exceptional research, certainly try. And well done for producing research that you feel meets the doctoral criteria. So go for it, but it's not often conferred. Ethical application. Application, is it online? Yes, it is online. Elaborate. Is it UNISA website? Okay, so yes, it is online. The link to the ethics I don't have at hand now. But if you look at your My UNISA, you will find the link. Otherwise, ask your supervisor for the link. If they can't give it, contact the postgraduate office. They should be able to assist, but it is online. Okay, I've been allocated a supervisor, but he doesn't respond to my emails. What can I do? Okay, it depends on for how long has he not replied to your emails. if about, I would say if she hasn't responded in 2 weeks, follow up with the email. If another week goes by, they still haven't responded, then consider escalating it to the M&D office, or try and contact the department or the head of department. But I would say before you escalate it, try what you can to get a response. But if you haven't gotten a response by the second or third email, then escalate it sooner rather than what you're waiting 2 or 3 months for them to reply. Make sure that you've got their correct email address. I know sometimes I don't get emails because they put an I in my email address, and then it doesn't get to me. So double check emails. You know that there is an option that you can have a read report on your emails. Try to put the read report on that, so you know that they might have opened it. So try avenues kind of politely before you escalate it, but also saying that don't wait too long, and that you're sitting for months not being able to do anything, and you're registered. Okay. Thank you for the thanks. 2 publication is mandatory for PhD students. That is currently the policy, yes. Do we have to write a conclusion in each chapter, or we use the concept summary in each chapter? Because others, they use a summary or a conclusion in each chapter. Okay. There's different views on it. I expect a conclusion in your literature review chapter, because you can reach a conclusion. Your literature review, you've got evidence, you've got an argument, and you can reach a conclusion. And you can reach a conclusion in your findings and the very last chapter. The other chapters are summaries. So a methodology chapter for me ends in a summary. Introduction chapter ends in a summary. Methodological chapter ends in a summary. But there's many different thoughts about that. For me, logically, that's my logical how I logically think about it. So you can't have a conclusion without an argument and evidence. So in some chapters you have that. But some people say that you need to do conclusions in all to remain consistency. There's definitely always a conclusion in the last chapter. So if nothing else, there's a conclusion. But speak about it to your supervisor. There's a lot of different ideas around that, and not everyone necessarily follows my logic. Concerning publications, do I need to add on the previous articles and chapters in books? Are those included? Since I published at master's level, I'm required to publish more during my PhD PR, and I'm kind of exhausted with the proposal. I'm so sorry, but your publications based on your data and your master's research doesn't count. If you do a PhD, your publications is around your PhD topic, it's around your PhD findings, it is related to the period of your PhD studies. So I do feel your exhaustion, but also remember it's years in making, so it doesn't mean you need to publish now, but you might need to conceptualize the publications, especially in a PhD. I am an academic, so that's why I ask the questions. Hi, Liesl. No problem. Thanks a lot. I missed the concept of the 5W in the proposal. I was just saying one way that we can extract, clarify our problem statement is using Kipling's 5 wise men, and that relates to what, when, who, why, and how. So what is the problem? For who is it a problem? Why is it a problem? How is it a problem? And what would happen if I didn't address the problem? So That's just a thinking map, the what, when, why, what, and how. All right. Yeah, Liesel, you just going back to your comment, you're very welcome to ask the questions. I don't mind if it's a student or academic, but even within the academic fraternity, there's often also differences. Okay, so I don't know if I've answered all 27 published questions. There's now 28. Okay, let's go. So please, if you still have any aspects that's not clear, if you want to ask, I know some of the questions is in broader aspects other than the topic. I'm happy to answer if I can, or give you an indication. Yes. Do these niche, the SDGs, NDP apply for honors students? Because I feel like the emphasis is more on M&D candidates. Yeah, it would apply to any research. Yeah. Sorry if I made it sound enough. I focus on M&D studies, but it is a general good practice for any relevance of research to find yourself somewhere in that. And there's so many areas that you can engage in that it is possible to do it on an honors level as well. Okay, so it wasn't meant only for M&D students, but to think about that. Even on an honors study, it's still research. The scope of your study is smaller, but the same methods for thinking about a worthy topic and the rest would be the same for any research. It's just that, the scope differs in terms of what's expected. So please try and stretch yourself even on this level and see if you can do the alignment and justification within these SDGs and definitely UNISA's catalytic initiatives. Okay, all right. So if there's still a bit of time, if there's anything else. Okay, so I do see there is one. I would like to find out if my problem should be mentioned in my introduction or in my background on postgrad level. Can you give a snippet example of how I could introduce the problem in the introduction and background, please? Okay, I think I've spoken to this in the presentation. Your introduction, your background is generally separate from your problem statement. So your introduction and background kind of foregrounds your problem statement. So introduction, background would kind of give you what's the context of the problem, what's the history maybe of the problem, what's the statistics around the problem. So that introduces, it is exactly what the word says, it gives background to your problem. Out of that, you have your problem statement. So it depends on different departments, but usually it's separated. There's either introduction or a background section, and then a problem statements as a separate section. So that's the difference. So background and introduction is kind of the same thing. It speaks to the context and the history or stats of the problem. And then the problem is the what, when, why, how, and for who it's a problem, and justifying that problem within literature, focusing on the evidence of that problem and articulating that problem. So I hope that gives you an indication of what is expected in the different sections. Okay, you're welcome, Patricia. Yes, so now you have a name and a face, and you're welcome. Are there students at UNISA who complete their PhD exactly in 2 years? I don't think you'll find many examples, but you can certainly. I finished my PhD in 18 months, and I know of a few other people that have done it while working full time. But I think I could have a synergy because my PhD was on something that I did in my work and within my professional background in a corporate setting. So my job was my PhD in some way, but it's not impossible. It can be done, but there's also logistics around that. So generally, they won't allow you to submit the same year that you registered. So that's out. And sometimes there are aspects that you don't have control over. So the time that it takes to get ethical clearance, for instance, you might be ready, but you can't collect data until you've got ethical clearance. Once you've got ethical clearance and everything goes according to plan, it's not impossible to do it in 2 years, but I don't think it's the norm, especially if you're studying and working, but I'm not saying it can't happen. What is the thin line between synthesizing and summarizing, and how do I spot when I'm now overlapping? Remember, synthesizing, before we synthesize, we analyze. All right, so synthesizing is the step after analyzing. So synthesizing is a step after analyzing. So in your literature review, you'll get to a section where you eventually synthesize and reach a conclusion. Your summary is really just giving an overview of the chapter or your writing. Your synthesis usually would be towards the latter part of your argument. In how I supervise. So a summary simply is, I think, on a lower level in terms of just summarizing a chapter. Your synthesis is, for me, a towards the end when you start saying, well, this is what I read, this is what I saw, this is the gaps, this is what I'm thinking. So it is integrated with your analysis, and it's, for me, at a higher level than what a summary is at the end, just restating what you did. I don't know if that helps in any way, but also, yeah, read. There's different arguments around what it is and what it's not, but I would, in a general sense, that would be my take on it. I'm just an honest student. No, you're not just an honest student. You are an honest student, and that's a very nice space to be in. So take it and enjoy it. This is all very overwhelming. Can't blame you. I feel like I'm grasping at straws. There's a lot I still have to learn and familiarize myself with. I absolutely get it. I absolutely get it that you feel completely overwhelmed and that you might now be swimming in a sea of information that you might have no idea what to do with. So after the session, take a break, go and rest, let it just simmer in your mind, and take a day or two just to take it in. Your mind is an amazing thing. We've planted some seeds for you, and you might find that you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and you find that aha moment and something gels. So the overwhelmed feeling is real. It's there, I think, virtually in every, well, not bad news, but you'll experience it often. But it's also a way of moving beyond the muddle. And we found us, there's one article with the title "As Clear as Mud." You're probably now as clear as mud. As the muddiness settles and the water becomes a bit clearer, that process also happens. Sometimes it happens at the end of your research, when you take a break and then things kind of gel. But be kind to yourself as well. All right, this is a lot of information to take in. It's a lot of not just conceptualizing, but also then applying. And that takes time. And it's conceptualizing is a skill. It's a high level skill. Right. So be kind to yourself. Just leave it for tonight and just rest. Okay. And then try and take it bit by bit. Maybe, have a tentative thing that you have a feel for, that you maybe have submitted or thinking about, and break it down in chunks. Maybe read a bit, write a bit. I find that when you read and write, that the writing also helps to clarify and put your thoughts on paper. And then it's kind of more in a visual form, and you can kind of move things around outside of your head, rather than where at the moment the muddle is very much in your head. And those are skills that we develop throughout our academic careers. I'm still very often very muddled. So it's a process. Be kind to yourself for now, okay? And being an honor student is quite a jump from your undergrad studies, where you had specific timelines, you had specific, it was mapped out for you. And now you're kind of moving to becoming independent. So there's less structure. There's also time constraints. At this stage, there might be a bit more structure than what you would find, but also remember it's a transitional stage going from undergrad to postgrad. When you do your master studies, you'll probably feel it again. And when you move to doctoral studies, you'll feel it again. If you write articles, you'll feel it again. So I don't think we ever arrive, and that we generally in this muddled state and try and make sense of it. And the same, with supervisors as well. We also develop skills and the ability to contain students. There's different supervision styles. There's different students. So also, be kind in terms of your supervisor. They're also human. We often think they are more than human, but they also have constraints, time constraints, supervision loads, teaching loads. So in this whole process, we are all very human with our own vulnerabilities as well. So it's a common space to be in, if that's any consolation in terms of the process. But stick with it. You develop the skills and the ability to deal with this ambiguity is a skill that comes with time. Okay, so I think I've gone through the questions more or less. I hope that it's given you some food for thought. If it's created some discomfort, it's also good, because it's in that discomfort that we learn. Or that it's just triggered your mind in some way to think about your study, to think about the relevance, because that was what this topic was tonight. How do we embed it in priorities, even if we're only an honors student? All right, and I say that tongue-in-cheek. All the best for your studies. I really hope all of you have your supervisors sorted out soon, and that you can continue with the real work. The processes, the ethical clearance, they all processes. So manage your time, the expectations, that's also a skill, your time management. So from me for tonight, I think I've given you a lot to consider and to digest, and all the best from my side, and we'll probably meet again on the platform soon. Have a good evening and take care. Bye-bye.